Vice Mayor Chad Thalman and Mayor Glenn Elliott in the house today for the last show of 2020. Something which I think most of us are going to be happy to see 2020 go away. It's been a pretty good year for me personally, but I mean, I got married and all that, but you know, on a city level, on a national level, it's been a year that I think, on a global level, it's a year that no one's really going to miss. And we're going to talk a little bit about some things that happened here in the city of Wheeling over the last year or so. We just kind of did a sampling of some of the things we've talked about on the show and otherwise. But if folks want to call in or text us, the number is 304-214-1600. And you can also go to the Watchdogs Facebook page and leave us a comment there. We'll do our best to respond to any questions or comments that we get. That's on the Watchdogs Facebook page, which I think is just, if you go to Facebook and search for the Watchdog WV, it comes right up. So anyway, Mr. Vice Mayor, happy almost New Year to you. What do you got? Any grand wisdom to share with everyone here on this last radio broadcast of 2020 for your Wheeling?
I'm not sure I'm the grand wisdom guru here, but we can talk a little bit about the year in review. If we have time, I'd like to mention some zoning issues. It's something that I want to bring up at our next meeting with your, and I always screw it up, the Mayor's Advisory Committee on Economic and Industrial Development. I want to ask their opinion on some of these zoning issues. If any of our listeners want to call in and talk about some of these zoning issues, offer their thoughts, feel free to call or text 304-214-1600.
So that's what you got. You got
That's
zoning.
what I got, zoning. Exciting topic.
That's an exciting topic that everybody's going to be on the edge of their seats listening to. But I know zoning is something that I do want that new commission to focus on, because it's one of the concerns we've heard from different members from the business community that the zoning laws are either outdated or just need to be fine-tuned a little bit. Things like parking requirements, things like street offsets, things like things that folks don't always think about. Simple things as our signage and all those laws or ordinances which can impact requirements for new construction. It's something we do need to look at. But before we get into zoning, because I know that's something that it's perhaps not the most exciting topic, I thought we'd do a little bit of a year in review, starting, of course, with just the sort of the obvious thing from the past year has been the onset of COVID-19. It really kind of hit in, March of this past year. And obviously, at the time, we didn't know what we were sort of in store for, but it came on slowly here in the valley at first. I think when we had our first really meeting with Howard Gamble and Lou Vargo at the health department, there were no cases in Ohio County. It was
I believe West Virginia was the last state in the country to have a positive case.
Yes, and I remember there was one or two cases in Belmont County. We sort of knew it was going to hit here. We didn't know when it would hit. I think it hit here by the end of March or maybe early April. But it took root here much slower than it did in other parts of the country, in part because we are geographically spread out. We are sort of a rural community, very different from somewhere like Los Angeles or New York City, where people do live sort of almost on top of each other in a lot of sort of apartment structures. So it took root here slower, but nonetheless, we did everything we could at the city level, I think, to prepare. We took some steps early on, which I think were the right moves. We suspended termination of water service for folks, except were requested by them. We sort of asked city staff to suspend all non-essential governmental travel. We did what we could to replace in-person meetings with Zoom meetings, including the city council level. I think we had our first Zoom meeting in April this year. Any city employees showing any signs of respiratory infections, we asked them to work from home. For a while there, we stopped enforcing city parking meters. I think we didn't reinstate that until July or August.
Playgrounds and parks were closed for
closed parks and playgrounds for a while. We set up a Dropbox payment system for folks to, if you don't want to go into the city county building to pay your water bills or your what other city bills you could pay, your parking tickets or whatever. We let that be payable outside with the Dropbox. We did sort of some parking relief for restaurants in terms of helping them reserve spaces for takeout or curbside pickup. And all in all, it, it's been an ongoing process of things we've done to kind of respond to this. We've encouraged people from the beginning to take steps like social distance to limit sort of getting together in bigger groups. And that's something we continue to do. I mean, the governor's order originally, I think the first order was 250 people. That's kind of come down over time to, what was it, 50 people? I'm not sure where it is.
Yeah, I don't know where we're at now.
Maybe groups of 25 or larger right now, and so it's impacted the way we do business at the city level. We've had the majority of our meetings in 2020 via Zoom. We did have a handful live before the pandemic, then some over the summer, but we made the decision to go back to Zoom meetings for the foreseeable future. I look forward to getting back into council chambers as much as anybody, I think, but we're still taking steps because we're not, we expected, I think early on, they expected a peak sometime over the summer. If you look at the numbers, though, we're still sort of at our peak. Each month gets worse than the prior one. The good news is the vaccine is coming out now and being spread throughout the community. But it's been a tough year, and it's been a year that anybody would prefer not to have. For us in city government, it's been a tough year because it's really, putting aside the actual way it's directly impacted people, and we've had, I think, now up to 40 people in Howard County who have lost their life to this virus. But it's changed a lot of things on the economic side of things. It has sort of put some headwinds into some of the economic growth we had seen going on. It's been particularly difficult, I think, for our restaurants and small retailers, and to this day, it is still having a big impact on the way of life here in the city.
Yeah, and as the vaccine comes out, I know the governor has different phases that he wants for people to receive the vaccine. Of course, the first phase was the first responders, individuals who work in a nursing home, medical personnel. So I think most of our first responders in the city of Wheeling have received their first dose. I think you got to wait maybe 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, you get the second dose. And once you get the second dose, they're telling us that you're basically at that point considered to be immune. I know there's a continuation of government phase where elected officials are supposed to get the vaccine. I know members of the state Senate and House of Delegates have been offered it. I don't know if any of them have received it yet. At the city council level, we have not been offered the vaccine. Personally, just my own personal thoughts and opinions, I think teachers should get it before we get it. I think, city staff, like the individuals at the operations department who might plow the streets or pick up the trash, should get it before members of city council get it. Those individuals are much more important to the day-to-day operations than, someone from city council. If those individuals get COVID and have to quarantine, maybe that delays trash pickup. Maybe it means we can't plow and salt the streets as quickly and efficiently as the city normally does. If a member of city council gets it, it's not a big deal. At least 2 members, including myself of city council, have had COVID already. We can still vote and do council meetings, on Zoom from our own house. So I'm not sure, and not that I'm going to argue with the governor if he wants elected officials to get it, but I'm not sure that members of city councils, county commissions, state senate, and House of Delegates should be the next phase, but it's my understanding that is one of the upcoming phases.
Yeah. It's certainly something for us to talk about. I think I would agree with you that the day-to-day, the city employees on the ground day-to-day, need to probably get it before we do. Certainly the city manager is someone who, he is, for all intents and purposes, the CEO of the city. I think he would need to get it before we do just because he is there each and every day, sort of responding to things as they arise. He is the chief executive officer who is in charge of all the city employees there. So I think that's something, were he to come down with this or something, I think it would directly impact city operations on a much more real basis in the short term than it would for any of us. We will do it. I'm certainly not afraid to take it. I look forward to taking it, but I think that we're probably not the most important folks in terms of day-to-day functionality at the city to take it. But I do think it's something you have to look at because I think the governor's talking about it's the Continuity and Governance Act or whatever. So you do want to have a sort of make sure that your operations, your governmental levels at the state and the local level, including not only city but also county level, you don't want to see a major impact there where things are sort of thrown off course. So it's something to consider. But I think for us at the city level, if we're offered it at the same time other city employees are, defer some of that to city employees who are more important on a day-to-day operational basis, and let us, we can continue to meet and do our jobs sort of remotely, as you said. And we have been able to do a pretty good job with Zoom. We're going to talk about that at the bottom of the hour with the city clerk, B.J. Delbert, who's joining us. I think the last time she was on the radio was about a year ago, or it might have been January of this year. But we're going to have her on to talk about some of the things, the challenges she's had to face as city clerk. She is on the front lines in many respects. It deals with a lot of constituent concerns and complaints and ideas. She's got to organize not only our meetings, but meetings of the various city commissions and councils and subcommittees. So she's had a very busy year, getting very familiar with Zoom technology, hosting meetings, sharing stuff on screens, making meetings go through, sharing that on Facebook Live so folks at home can watch. It's been a busy year for her, but she's done a great job at it. So we'll talk to her coming up in about the hour. But I don't want to have a COVID-only show because, COVID can be, if you turn on the news, it's still the
news story of the year, that's for sure.
But looking back over the course of the year, before COVID happened, I went back and kind of went through my notes of different things we talked about. We, of course, had the State of the City, which, I'm looking forward to 2021. Are we going to be able to have a State of the City in the format we've had before? I don't know if that's possible, at least not by February. So we may have to push it back into either later the year, maybe, I think about doing it in June or July of 2021. But at the last State of the City, I look back, we did, as we do every year, we recognize different people throughout the community. A couple of the highlights last year were, of course, the Gateway Award we gave to Heidi Friend for her many, many years as the Executive Director of Wheeling Heritage. Heidi was so instrumental in things like, bringing Heritage Port out of Wheeling, making historic preservation a priority, revitalizing the Artisan Center into what it is today. So we recognized Heidi, which I think was long overdue. We also recognized the Community Spirit Award we gave to Jay Fry, who did a superb job as the Wheeling 250 Committee Chairman. For those who don't remember, 2019 was the city's 250th year since its founding in 1769. So we did our best to sort of take stock and have a year of celebrations. Jay did a wonderful job at that. I don't think I could have picked anybody better for that role. Looking back, just a few of the other honorees from last year's State of the City. Ludenow Incorporated celebrated its 100th year as a family-owned business here in the city of Wheeling. I think they're in the third generation right now. We recognize Grove High Valley for their public market downtown, which has been a success, and despite the pandemic, continues to do pretty well. I was in there the other day. Recognize someone like Dr. Jean Finstein, who is all over this city. She's the the director of Friends of Wheeling. She was the chairperson of the board of Wheeling Heritage. She was also very involved in the Wheeling 250 committee. So looking back, it's nice to think back. We did have a State of the City less than a year ago with a big room of people, crowd of people. We probably won't be able to do that next time, but it was nice. Things were looking pretty good in the city. We were recognized last year. I brought this up at the State of the City. We were ranked number 5 nationwide by Bloomberg on the list of U.S. metropolitan areas where per capita income grew from 2016 to 2019. So if you think about that, across the country, the Wheeling metropolitan area, whatever, a statistical area, which includes not only Wheeling, but a little bit of Belmont County, all of Ohio County, we had an 8.9% income capita growth, per capita income growth over the prior 3 years. That's something that didn't get a lot of press last year. We tried to research it to see how much of that is just oil and gas stuff, but it's not. If you break it down, it's much bigger than just oil and gas royalty payments or whatever. So it's something that I think we should pat ourselves on the back on that community. Things are, or at least we're looking up really well, and then the pandemic happened and things slowed down a little bit. But we are a region, I think, that's on the rise. I think we are a city on the rise. And, I'm looking forward to once this pandemic sort of eases its grip a little bit on us on doing a lot here in the next couple of years that we have in office.
Yeah, and the city of Wheeling finances are in pretty good shape in large part due to the fiscal stewardship of yourself, Mayor, the previous city council, our city manager, and the federal government. The city did receive some money, COVID-related money. So the city is in pretty good shape financially. Hopefully we can get this pandemic behind us at some point. and we can use some of that money to make improvements in the community. So there's much needed improvements, whether it's paving or other infrastructure needs that I look forward to taking care of and working on and improving the city of Wheeling on over the next several years.
All right, so looking back, this is also COVID related as well, but it was related to something else the city did. One of the things that I think the newspaper recognized, one of the top 10 stories, was the city's decision to purchase OVMC, or really to acquire it. We didn't really purchase it. We acquired the OVMC campus. Before we did so, folks may remember, we were, before we really knew what the pandemic would bring to Wheeling, we were looking at OVMC as a potential COVID treatment facility, as a backup facility, if our existing hospital bed capacity here in the community was going to be stressed. So we invited the Army Corps of Engineers to come in and look at this back in either March or April, I forget the month, and you participated in one of those meetings or walkthroughs with me, and they did a solid site assessment, identified the strengths and weaknesses of the building. Of course, the fact that it was a former hospital sort of made it a very obvious choice to be used as a treatment facility. But we did get some pushback locally here. I'm not going to name any names, but we got some pushback.
Wheeling Hospital?
All right, fine. We got some pushback, and we ultimately the state DHHR decided that based on where the peak projections were, that our bed capacity in the community was going to be adequate. Now, it did certainly over the summer, we never came anywhere near sort of reaching that bed capacity. If you look at the numbers lately, I do worry that we might be getting close to it. You hear a lot of things of staffing shortages at some of the hospitals in the community, us being kind of pushed to the limits of our sort of bed capacity right now. But we did try to get OVMC considered for that, and I certainly hope that it doesn't prove to be necessary, but we did try. But at the end of the day, that was when we were still in discussions with the prior owner of the property on it. A few months after that decision, we decided to go forward with and acquire the property anyway. It was a 7-0 council vote, I believe, at the last meeting of the prior city council before they left their seats. And we got some pushback for it, but we basically got 700-something thousand square feet of campus space, basically for the cost of the legal fees and I currently own taxes on the property. What those are is still being finalized, but it's going to be less than $1 million probably. The city ends up getting property worth somewhere between $10 and $30 million if you add up all the properties. So I think it was a good deal for the taxpayers. We've had to, we use one of those buildings for the police department. The old VPC building is already, we've already approved design work for that. It's going to be moving forward next year. And we're sitting on the other parts of the campus. We've used some of it. We've got some city employees in there now just to keep the lights on and keep the insurance costs under control, and I think that's sort of working out well for them. But we have a lot of interest in these properties from outside third parties, and we're I think our next meeting of City Council will be discussing one of those. So it's very exciting. It was a risky move, I think, for City Council to take on this property, but I think the cost of us not acting would have been much, much greater. You're looking at a piece of the center Wheeling area which would have gone dark and been owned by an out-of-town business which really doesn't have Wheeling's interest, at the top of its priority list. So I think it was the right move. Only time will tell, but it was a big decision, and it was one that prior council deserves a lot of credit for all coming around on.
Yeah, voting to take ownership of the OVMC campus wasn't something I was particularly comfortable with, but I was even more uncomfortable with doing nothing. If we did nothing, in my mind, we were basically giving up on those buildings, giving up on that section of town, and I think it took a lot of courage for certain members of council to vote to acquire that property, but I was proud that City Council did vote 7-0 to take on that property, and we have had some luck in getting some interest from the private sector, and hopefully over the next year or so, we can get some of those buildings put back in productive use.
All right, I hear the Beatles. Must be time for the bottom out of break. We'll be right back here with Your Wheeling, No Two Ways About It.
Virginia Metro News. I'm Shauna Johnson. More federal pandemic relief monies in the process of going out today. What is a second round of direct payments in the coronavirus pandemic? Generally, the payments add up to $600 per person. Direct deposits started overnight and paper check mailings begin today. The U.S. Senate is not yet taking up a U.S. House bill raising the payment amount to $2,000, a level President Donald Trump called for last week. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is planning to tie that proposal to two other issues: election security and the repeal of protections for social media companies covered in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Today, the U.S. Senate is going to vote on an override of President Trump's veto of the National Defense Authorization Act, what could be the first successful override vote under President Trump. This holiday travel season's bringing more people to Charleston's Yeager Airport, the largest airport in West Virginia. Chris Williams is Yeager's public affairs manager.
It felt busy. It's kind of felt normal. You saw a lot of people, going to the checkpoint and waiting at the gate.
He says more than 400 people went through Yeager on Sunday, about half of the average passenger load from the same time last year, but one of the busiest days for 2020. You're listening to Metro News, the voice of West Virginia. Nearly $3 billion is how much is now invested in West Virginia's Smart 529 higher education savings program, run through the state treasurer's office.
Thousands of West Virginia families and parents and grandparents is invested in the 529 plan.
John Perdue is the state's outgoing treasurer. The director of the State Public Service Commission's Consumer Advocate Division, Jackie Roberts, will be moving into a new role with the PSC in the new year. From the Metro News Anchor Desk, I'm Shauna Johnson.
In a divided year, we can still be united through giving. There's a $300 above-the-line tax deduction this year thanks to the CARES Act. You can take a $300 deduction for charitable donations. As an organization that promotes giving, the United Way of the Upper Ohio Valley encourages you to utilize this tax deduction. Consider making a donation to a nonprofit agency with a cause that's important to you. Any donation made to the United Way will go towards our annual campaign supporting local programs focusing on the community's toughest needs.
Oh, there's something so real about living local, and I know without a doubt I'm not alone. And I love living local. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. Said I love living local. WTRF is working for me. The Ohio Valley is where I love to be.
Baby, when it's cold outside, it's warm on the Watchdog. Live, local, community-driven talk radio. Just the way you like it.
Hey man, what can I get you?
Yeah, can I have 2 Coors Lights?
You got it. Hey Mike! I need 2 Coors Lights!
Sure thing.
With a taste as cold as the Rockies, only Coors Light gives you refreshment every time.
Here you go.
Thanks, Mike. Doing a great job. All right, 2 ice-cold Coors Lights.
That's the coldest beer I've ever had.
Hey, they don't call it the world's most refreshing beer for nothing.
Okay, be honest with me. Do you really have the Rocky Mountains in your beer cooler?
You don't believe it? Check it out.
Man, that's pretty amazing.
I know, right? I can't believe it myself sometimes. I mean, this cooler is only 3 feet wide.
Coors Light, the world's most refreshing beer. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. With great beer comes great responsibility.
Are you struggling to make payments due to an unexpected financial obligation or loss of income? Are you receiving calls from debt collectors? Are you feeling overwhelmed and unsure of what steps to take next? Then you need the experience and expertise of attorney Tom McIntyre and his staff to help guide you through these temporary hardships. Want to hear more about how Tom can help? Then call 877-456-4155 and receive a free copy of Tom's ebook, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Tom's ebook covers many questions people have about bankruptcy and includes interesting stories about people who tried to avoid filing and people who have filed for bankruptcy. We think you'll be surprised to learn some interesting facts about bankruptcy. Call 877-456-4155.
For all of your IT needs, visit OmniPerforms.com. Omni Strategic Technologies, the only IT company that the Watchdog trusts.
Text us or call us with questions or comments. Your wheeling, no two ways about it, continues on The Watchdog.
All right, you're listening to Your Wheeling, no two ways about it, here on the Watchdog, 1600 AM, 98.1 FM. I'm Chad Thalman, Vice Mayor of the City of Wheeling, in the studio with co-host Mayor Glenn Elliott. And on the line, we should have our city clerk, BJ Dobert. DJ, are you with us?
Keyword is should have. Well, she was going to call in.
We are expecting BJ to call in, kind of do a year in review with her. BJ has it's kind of maybe when you get up to the third floor, which is the kind of the city floor, the city county building, she might be the first contact most people have. Of course, COVID has kind of changed how people come into the building, but she is kind of in charge of setting up the Zoom meetings for not just city council meetings, but all the different, traffic commission and planning commission and all the different committees that the city has. So she's kind of the point person on setting up all that stuff, and someone that we lean on a lot. But she should be calling in. Mayor, the only thing I have to discuss without BJ here is something I mentioned at the beginning of the show, zoning. Should we roll back zoning? Is zoning in the city of Wheeling too restrictive? That's all I got. What do you have for us?
You really want to talk zoning?
I think as boring as it is, it's an issue that we have to look at.
I wanted to continue my year in review, but you know what? I'm going to give you what you want. We're going to talk some zoning. I'll give you 2 minutes for zoning.
I don't think we could cover this in 2 minutes. But what I will say is, that just some background on zoning. It's my understanding that Wheeling is the only city in the Ohio Valley that has zoning, period. It's one of the only cities in the state that has zoning. Zoning tends to be more calm in larger cities. So Wheeling being the largest city in the Ohio Valley could explain why Wheeling is, my understanding, the only city that has zoning. But the question that I want to pose to any of our listeners that want to call in and to your Committee on Economic and Industrial Development is our zoning too restrictive? So there's a few different types of zoning that I'm going to bring up today, and that I'll bring up to your committee, Mayor, and see what members of the business community suggest that City Council do. The question is our zoning, it definitely is a roadblock to economic development, or at least a speed bump in some senses. But are the benefits, do they outweigh the headwinds or the drawback to economic development? And I think we have BJ on the phone.
I think we have BJ on the phone.
How are you doing?
Hi, guys. Good. How are you?
Good. BJ, I was just getting on the topic of zoning. So quickly, I'm going to talk about zoning for a little bit. If you have any comments, feel free to offer your thoughts on zoning, if some of this zoning should be rolled back. If anyone wants to call in, feel free to call in. The number is 304-214-1600. And then we want to get back to you, BJ, and talk about kind of the year in review, what this year's been like for you.
Sure.
But on the topic of zoning, currently in the city of Wheeling, you cannot build a duplex, you cannot change a single-family home into a duplex. We do have duplexes in the city of Wheeling. They were all grandfathered in prior to 2001. You could build a duplex. You could change a single-family home into a duplex. Some of the other residential things that you cannot do in the city of Wheeling, you can't have a tiny house in your backyard. Some people call that a mother-in-law suite. You can't have a granny flat above a garage, or an apartment above a garage. Some people refer to that as a granny flat. So these are some things that prior to 2001 you could do in the city of Wheeling. My understanding is in 2001 the zoning in the city was completely changed, and these things were basically eliminated. Now there are duplexes in the city. There are apartments above garages, or granny flats as some people call them. But all of those things were done prior to 2001, and then were grandfathered in. So some of the reasons that I think we maybe should look at allowing these things and changing some of this zoning is, of course, families aren't as large as they were 100 years ago when many Wheeling homes were built. So maybe you have some large single-family homes that nowadays would be better utilized as a duplex or a multifamily unit. My thinking is that, we should allow the city the flexibility to adapt and change with the times. And we talk about, not just us on city council, but people all over Wheeling for a long time, as long as I can remember, have been talking about ways to turn around the population decline that's been going on here in the Ohio Valley for decades. So in my mind, there's only two ways to turn around the population decline. We either need to get more people living in our current neighborhoods, or we need to allow developers to build new neighborhoods. The problem with allowing developers to build new neighborhoods is that comes with a cost. Even if the developer pays for everything up front, the city still has to agree to maintain that street. So that means plowing and salting it in the winter, paving and patching it in the summer. Those are new water and sewer lines the city has to agree to maintain. That's an extra neighborhood or extra streets that the city has to provide police and fire protection to. So these are all things that come with a cost. And if we don't allow our city to grow in a financially sustainable way, then future city councils have the unpleasant task of deciding if we're going to cut services or raise taxes. So those are questions I want to throw out there. Should zoning be changed? Should those types of zoning be changed? I know the reason that we have that zoning and the reason that some people may push back on allowing a single-family house to be changed into a duplex is, some people say it changes the character of the neighborhood. The more people you have in a neighborhood, that's more noise, more trash, and probably the biggest complaint that we may get if we look at changing some of the zoning is, more people is going to mean more parking, so the streets might be congested. I know it's a very personal issue. If you come home and you expect to be able to park right in front of your house on the street, and there's other cars there, and now you have to park on a different street or down the street from your house. So those are all issues that I want to discuss. I also want to discuss parking minimums, which is a whole different zoning issue. But Mayor, BJ, do you guys have thoughts on the zoning that I just mentioned?
Well, for all the listeners who aren't sleeping right now after listening to that rant by the vice mayor, no, look, zoning is an issue that it can be controversial. Some people see it as an infringement on one's property rights. I look at zoning a little bit differently. I think zoning, in some respects, can protect your property rights because one of the benefits of moving or buying into a community that has zoning is not only what you can put in a particular area, but what can't be put in a particular area. So, so it limits and prevents a sort of industrial development right next to residential development or whatever. So is the city of Wheeling zoning in need of a facelift and sort of dusting off and looking at? Absolutely. It's something we tried in the prior council with Councilwoman Scatterday. But do I think we need to just start chopping up all these sort of regulations and throw them away and starting over? I don't know about that. I think we need to look at it again. It's a complicated process, and it's almost something that needs outside help on just to kind of take hold of the entirety of our zoning sort of footprint. But there are a lot of benefits to zoning, and you can make cities a lot more attractive with thoughtful zoning, but you don't want to deter development. And so the key is your zoning. If you talk to smart developers want to invest in areas that have smart zoning. They don't want to be somewhere with no zoning because, like I said, you could put a big apartment building somewhere and then there's industrial development right next door which is emitting gas into that area or whatever. It's going to deter that investment. So you want to know with some reasonable certainty if you're going to make an investment here, you want to know what's not going to be able to be built in the immediate area. So zoning has benefits. And if you don't like zoning, then that's a reason why you may want to build out sort of in some part of the county or whatever where there isn't zoning. But there are a lot of benefits, and it just has to be done smartly. And I think sometimes, what happens is, our laws get put on the books and they get left there for years and then they're not thought about enough. Our parking minimums are a great example of something that...
Parking minimums are something else I want to bring up.
It dates to 1970s, 1980s, thinking about every family's going to have 2 or 3 cars and they need all these parking spaces, and that's just not the way people live anymore. Especially some folks, younger folks don't even have cars. If they do if they want a car or whatever, they rent one and they don't even have a car for a full time. So we do need to think about stuff like parking minimums and all that. It's a conversation which I look forward to having at the Mayor's sort of advisory commission here next month and going into 2021. But I don't want to bore our listeners too much with zoning today.
So what do you got, Mayor?
Well, I want to hear what our city clerk has to say because our city clerk, BJ Delbert, is this now your 3rd year on the job, BJ?
It is. I just, last week was 3 years.
And are you saying that I missed your 3-year anniversary? I apologize for that.
You did miss the anniversary. That's okay.
I do apologize. But you stepped into this job, you filled very big shoes of Janice Jones. You stepped into this job. I think you've done a wonderful job. You had your first municipal election last year. You had to run it during a pandemic, which I'm sure is not what you thought when you're signing up for. Or all these meetings.
I don't think anybody was ready for that.
All the meetings I helped host through Zoom technology, getting stuff on Facebook Live. What's this past year like? I've been for you, in now your third year as Wheeling City Clerk.
So, like I said, I don't think anybody was ready for what 2020 was going to bring. But I also, without dwelling on, the obvious negatives that came with it, I really do think it has forced, I know us, and I could probably speak for a lot of other businesses and industries, it kind of stopped everybody in their tracks. It made you rethink how you do things, make you rethink about the why. I think a lot of times you get caught up in this is the way we've always done it. And, this is how it goes. Where this year kind of really put a halt and kind of slapped you in your face and stopped you in your tracks. And it was like, well, why do we do that? Can we look outside the box? Can we think of new ways to do things that are helpful? And I think there's a lot of things that happened this year that I'm excited to continue into 2021. You touched on online meetings. That's been huge. I think while it was a learning curve to get started, I really haven't heard any negative feedback about it. I think community engagement is up. People are enjoying watching. At the council level, there always gets a lot of news coverage and attention like that. But even at the committees and boards are now online as well. So I think that has really brought community members in and can kind of see how things happen at the lower level and how they even progress to council. So I think that part has been great.
It has been, I definitely see the benefits in the online meetings, especially for folks who, for whatever reason, can't get down to the city county building to see a meeting. I think as we gravitate back into in-person meetings, we need to think about, do we want to keep doing these online like this or not? As a council member, I do think you'll lose just a little bit because you can't have the little sidebar conversations. You don't really... seeing people in a Zoom meeting is not the same as seeing them across the room, and it's just a little bit of a different feel. I'm getting used to it now, but I still don't prefer it. But I mean, it's certainly, in the situation that we're in, it's the best outcome to do it that way. But it has been a challenge, and I do want to give some thought. I mean, as we get back into the world where we can have in-person meetings, what do we want to do in terms of making things online as well, so folks who maybe choose not to come as well can still participate, at least can still hear. Because sometimes, the newspaper does cover our meetings, the news does cover our meetings, like TV news as well, but you don't always get everything that happened at the meeting. You might get one or two stories will be emphasized, one vote will be emphasized.
Right.
A lot of things happen at those meetings, and sometimes there's conversation, there's disagreement sometimes, and I think that is, I think the more people see that, they realize, oh, okay, I see both sides of that issue. Sometimes... Right. When it gets reported in the news may only be one side of the story.
Sure, and I think it's allowed people to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Yeah. They can hear it firsthand, both sides of the argument. So I think, but when you look back, because we can see like our analytics and stuff through Facebook, and there was one council meeting that had over 1,000 views. 1,000 people would never attend a council meeting. Yeah. So whether people are just playing it at their office and listening to it, or engaged in watching it, that I don't know. But I think there's definitely, and there's clear statistics and signs that there's been more engagement. So I think that's been a huge win.
Well, yeah, it's
for better or for worse.
It's something that when the vice mayor and I first ran for office 5 years ago. At the time, council meetings were not even televised, and it was one of the things we thought we should put council meetings on TV just so more people can watch them. And so we did vote early on. I'm not sure if that was before you were there or not, to put them on Channel 14. And so that's been going on, but I don't know how many people watch that channel or not, because from time to time I would hear some feedback from it. Oh, I saw it on Channel 14, whatever, but I didn't hear nearly as much feedback as we have since we've had them on Facebook Live, and folks have been able to watch them as they unfold live. So yeah, I do think it's a good step forward for transparency. Some of the fears that we were told when we suggested televised meetings, we were told, well, you're going to get council members that just grandstand. I haven't seen that really be an issue.
No.
It's always possible, I guess, but I haven't seen it. And so I think it's good. I think it's anytime you have more people engaged in the governing process and participating and watching, I think it's better off. So,
I agree.
all right. So, looking back into 2020, some of the things, we did have a municipal election. We have them every 4 years. Unlike some cities that have staggered city councils, we have one election every 4 years to elect all 7 members of city council, the six council members, and the mayor. Your job is to oversee that election. This was your first one, kind of overseeing it. What was your takes on that? Obviously, you're running it. It was run during a pandemic year, so it was a little bit of a different feel for the election. But any insights from that? Any thing you would do differently, or do you think it? I've never heard anything criticized about it, so it sounds like you did a pretty good job. But what's your take on it?
I think this election this year, at least on a local level, without getting into the large, issues at hand, but I think the election went very smooth in Ohio County, and definitely within our municipality. We partner with the county, and they had early election. We saw a lot higher turnouts there. Because of the pandemic, people still wanted to vote in person, so a lot more people came out early to avoid large lines on election day and things like that. But we had no issues. It still all ran pretty smoothly. There were, as you know, the 3 new candidates, so we welcomed them in July, which was fantastic, and it just brought a lot new perspective. And the 3 new and the 4 returning, I think, have meshed very well together. In hindsight, this year feels like it went fast and slow all at the same time. There wasn't much time between the election and the first meeting, and I think everybody has, kind of unified as one body pretty seamlessly.
Well, yeah, I do feel a little bit sorry for the new members because they came right into office with it was a shortened timetable because the election was pushed back over a month. And we had just purchased OVMC at the last meeting of the prior council, so they basically took office with the city having made this a fairly momentous decision right before that they had to basically deal with the consequences of. Yeah, but they have done a great job, I think, getting up to speed. And I think we all mesh very, very well. We don't always agree on everything, but we don't always agree with everything with the prior council as well. I do want to say just some things about the 3 members who are no longer on council. 2 of the incumbents chose not to run for re-election. That was Councilwoman Scatterday and Councilwoman Linda Kozlik. And then one incumbent did run for re-election and lost. That was Councilman Ken Eimer. I was thinking about the 3 of them, and I do miss them a little bit because they all added something in their own way. Ken was probably the most quiet member of council, and some folks would assume that, he's just quiet, he didn't care about things. But Ken cared very deeply about things. He was very engaged on Wheeling Island community. He just wasn't a flashy guy, didn't do social media very much, so you didn't hear very much from him. And but I do miss him because, Ken was a good member of council. And on the things that, he didn't say much, but when he had something to say, he would, I wouldn't necessarily do it publicly, but he'd pull you aside or whatever, email you, call you aside and say, Mayor, I need you to help on this, whatever. He was very engaged in his own way. Councilwoman Kozlik, she was appointed to a position. I'm still mad about this because when we appointed her to that position, some folks in the media here were very critical of the process used, which could not have been more fair. But I guess we didn't. What was it, Mr. Vice Mayor? We didn't disclose all the people who had applied.
Yeah, I believe there was 8 people that applied for that seat, and we look back all the way to I think when Jack Liphart was mayor, and they had a seat to fill. And they did not disclose all the candidates that applied. So we just thought we don't want to embarrass the 7 people that applied that did not get the position. So we just decided we weren't going to disclose, all the people that applied. Some media outlets made a big deal about that. They ended up, I think
they did FOIA, and it became public.
And they ended up getting the list anyways, which was fine. But I think there was a sense that there was some questionable practices going on, particularly because Councilwoman Melinda Kozlik at the time was dating a city employee, and I was a little disgusted with the way the media treated that. They literally made her appointment. This is the first time in Wheeling's history, I believe, we had 2 women on city council. She's probably only the 7th or 8th woman to ever serve on city council. And instead of kind of focusing on that, certain media outlets actually focused on who a member of council was dating, which I thought was
Yeah.
I mean, the local media should be better than what you see when you're standing in line at the checkout counter in Kroger's and you see the gossip magazines. I would expect more of our local media. Unfortunately, in that particular occasion, I think they failed all of us.
It was,
I think that
Yeah.
really, it just went back to, it wasn't our story to tell. At that point, it was a job application and an interview. And I think it wasn't that it was meant to be a secret. It's public information. It was just one of those things that once it's official and announced, I don't know, I think it was not our story to tell that they applied. They weren't running for an election. It was appointment. It was a little bit different.
well, one of the things that sort of galled me a little bit, and this is not an airing of grievances or anything, but just is that there were suggestions made that she was appointed to be a yes vote. And I don't think anybody over the time of the last 4 years of that council, I don't think anybody voted against me more than Councilwoman. Yeah. So it's just.
And there were some big votes.
There were some
that were split votes. And
important votes where she voted, where I was a yes vote and she was a no vote or vice versa. And I mean, we didn't appoint her to be a yes vote. We appointed her because we thought she was the best qualified. But anyway, I do wish her well. You know, I know I thought long and hard about running for re-election herself and opted not to. But I do think that being thrown into the situation that way was probably something that, you know, if the media could do a better job of it, I think they should, because I think they didn't give her a completely fair coverage. And then, of course, we had Councilwoman Scatter in there. Councilwoman Scatterday was one of the people who, when we first ran for office, sort of ran with us as a, what do you want to call it, a slate or whatever, 4 or 5 years ago. I know Wendy thought long and hard about running for re-election, ultimately chose not to. She said it was a very bittersweet decision. I know that being on city council is, and for her in particular, because she attended during those 4 years a lot of the streetscape meetings with the folks down in Moundsville, and hours of engineering meetings going over stuff. And it just took a toll on her, I think, and I think she wanted to take some time away. I'm sure Wendy will be involved in city politics and city affairs going forward into the future, but she was a very, very conscientious member of council. And, you know, I didn't know her replacement, Councilman Sklavanakis, that well before he ran, and I didn't know much about him, but, you know, I think he's also very a very nice addition. I think in their own way, they both represent their Woodsdale community very, very well, and it's been a nice transition there. So, I mean, we did lose 3 people council. We picked up 3 more. We had a historic election of the first openly transgender person in West Virginia elected to any office, Rosemary Ketchum, and that's something that I remember for a week or two there. It was like I'd be reading about the city of Wheeling in national news stories every day, and that's always good, especially when you're confronting the sort of West Virginia stereotypes out there. So it was a big year, a big election. I mean, I was happy to get reelected, and I think the vice mayor was too, and along with Councilman Palmer and Thorngate. But you know, we have a lot of work ahead of us. So, what do you got, Mr. Vice Mayor? I think we've got a minute left.
BJ, what do you got? I'm going to toss it back to you.
All right.
What are you looking forward to in 2021?
Oh, like I said, I hope that there's some things that we learned in 2020 that continue. One other thing I did want to touch on when I was talking about, you know, just kind of stops and force you to look at technology and how we do things. The city, and I think, you know, we've tried to get the word out there, but there's no longer a fee to pay your water bill online. You can pay your water bill online or over the phone, and all fees are waived. That was to encourage people to take up online bill paying, where there is drop boxes in the lobby. So things like that we've really had to look at. I hope those things continue.
Well, I
think those were positive to come out.
All right. Well, I hear the music playing. BJ, I thank you so much for calling in today. City Clerk BJ Delbert. You're listening to Your Wheeling No Two Ways About It. We'll be back next week in 2021. Thank you.
The ABC News is brought to you by Thomas Auto